Lewin Jade is a 15-year-old boy who just got a brutal reality check. For the last 5 years, he worked at the Healers Guild in the big city of Grezista. He got the job because of his rare gift called Plant Master, which lets him identify any plant. However, since he was a commoner in a place full of arrogant nobles, his life was a nightmare. He was bullied, overworked, and even used as a human guinea pig for dangerous potion tests. On his 15th birthday, the age of adulthood, Lewin hoped for a change. Instead, the guild chief, Brandon Gage, fired him on the spot. Brandon had only hired him because of government rules, and now that Lewin was an adult, those rules didn't apply. To make it worse, Brandon gave him the lowest possible work ratings, making it impossible for Lewin to get a job anywhere else in the city. Kicked out with nothing but his small savings, Lewin realized he was in deep trouble. His parents were long gone, so going home wasn't an option. He considered becoming an adventurer, but he had zero combat skills. Then he thought about his secret ability. He can actually create plants out of thin air using his magic. The problem? His mana capacity is so tiny he can only make 3 cheap herbs before collapsing. But Lewin had a plan. Through his plant master skill, he discovered a secret about magical grass. While most people use it just to recover magic, eating it while at full power actually increases your total mana capacity permanently. If he can boost his mana, his plant master skill becomes a goldmine. Desperate to turn his life around, Lewin headed to the Adventurers Guild. Despite being intimidated by the tough, muscular warriors and the rough atmosphere, he walked up to the counter. He decided to use his life savings to hire an escort to take him into the mountains so he could gather enough magical grass to finally change his fate. Lewin Jade visited the Adventurers Guild to hire guards for a trip to Mount Cornello. When he gave his name and mentioned he used to work for the Healers Guild, the receptionist's face went cold. It was clear his bad reputation had traveled fast. Even though he wasn't strong enough to be an adventurer himself, the guild still allowed him to post a quest. He needed low-cost escorts for a 4-day plant collecting trip. After a long night's rest at a cheap inn, which was still better than the shed he used to live in, Lewin returned to the guild. The receptionist presented 3 options. The first was the Azure Alliance, an E-rank group with D-rank skills but a history of bad behavior. The second was Bakuro, a bottom-tier group with no real reputation. The third was Iron Gear, a team of rookies with potential but no experience. Fearing for his life and his savings, Lewin chose the Azure Alliance because they were affordable and capable, even if they were a bit rough. The contract cost him 4 gold coins, which was a third of everything he owned. To make that money back, he planned to use his plant master skill to find rare herbs like Linren weed and angel grass. He spent the rest of his day buying basic supplies, rations, a small shovel, and a rusty dagger. That afternoon, Lewin met his new team. The leader was Ahmed, a tall, muscular woman with a loud personality and a striking face. She was joined by Dion, a handsome blonde guy who looked like a noble, and Smash, a short, bald man with a messy beard. They weren't exactly professional, but they seemed okay enough for the job. The next morning, the group set off on foot. Ahmed made it clear they wouldn't carry him if he got tired. If he couldn't keep up, the deal was off. As they walked away from the city, Lewin felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This trip was his only chance to get his life back on track. 2 hours into the hike, the serious mood vanished. Ahmed began singing a loud, annoying song about rabbits on repeat. The singing was so off-key and constant that it started getting on everyone's nerves. Dion leaned in and whispered to Lewin, asking if he found the singing uncomfortable too. Lewin quietly agreed, and even the quiet Smash nodded. Suddenly, Ahmed turned around with a sharp grin, proving she had much better hearing than they expected. She called them out for complaining and challenged them to sing something better if they were so bored. Lewin jumped, his heart racing from being caught, while the others quickly tried to act like they hadn't said a word. On the way to Mount Cornello, Ahmed forced Smash into a loud sing-off that lasted for miles. Lewin tried to stay out of it to save his energy, but he eventually got dragged in too. By the time the massive mountain finally came into view, Lewin was physically drained and his throat was sore from all the shouting. When they reached the base, Lewin realized the mountain was way more dangerous than he expected. He nervously asked the Azure Alliance to escort him halfway up instead of leaving him at the bottom. Ahmed looked annoyed, but her teammates Dion and Smash agreed to help because they liked Lewin's vibe. Ahmed eventually gave in, though she ended up punching Smash again for using her old nickname. As they climbed, the monsters started coming fast. Goblins, kobolds, and killer hornets appeared everywhere. Ahmed showed off her true power, swinging a giant greatsword with such speed that the monsters didn't stand a chance. Dion explained that Ahmed used to be a top-tier A-rank adventurer, but was kicked out of her old group for her bad attitude. This made Lewin realize he was traveling with someone way stronger than a typical low-rank escort. To mess with her teammates, Ahmed playfully lured a group of goblins toward Dion and Smash, forcing them to fight while she carried Lewin away at high speed. They eventually reached a clearing halfway up the mountain. Exhausted, Ahmed immediately flopped onto the ground and fell asleep, leaving the others to keep watch. While Ahmed napped, Lewin went off to gather herbs. He used his special ability to identify plants just by touching or tasting them. He found plenty of basic healing herbs, but then he discovered something incredible: dumbbell weed. It was a level 89 plant that could instantly strengthen muscles, something extremely rare that most people thought was just a myth. Since Ahmed was still snoring, Smash offered to escort Lewin further into the woods to find more plants. Smash used his old thief skills to sense and avoid monsters, making the job easy. Lewin worked fast, gathering a haul worth over a gold coin in just a few hours. Smash was impressed, realizing Lewin's herb-gathering skills were so good that they easily covered the cost of the escort. As they headed back to the clearing, the air suddenly changed. Lewin smelled blood and got ready for a fight, but Smash told him to relax. The blood wasn't from a monster attack, it was from Ahmed. She had finally woken up, and the area was now covered in the remains of the monsters she had dealt with while they were gone. Smash warned Lewin that while the monsters were dead, a grumpy, awake Ahmed was the real danger they had to worry about now. Ahmed was covered head to toe in blood, laughing like nothing happened, standing right next to a massive 3-meter monster she had just taken down by herself. Lewin and Smash had just gotten back to camp and were completely frozen in shock. Ahmed was in a great mood, announcing they had dinner sorted and telling Dion and Smash to drain the thing while she went to wash up. Dion, a skilled archer who had been hiding during the whole fight because getting caught in Ahmed's attacks would mean game over for him, just sighed and got to work. Lewin ended up helping too, mostly because he didn't want to be left alone with Ahmed. The meat that came out of it actually looked really good though. That night they had a big barbecue. Ahmed ate an insane amount, fed Lewin too, and honestly the whole thing was kind of fun. Lewin realized it had been a long time since he'd had a day that actually felt good. He woke up the next morning with a serious stomachache from all the meat. Empty alcohol bottles were scattered around Ahmed, who was still knocked out next to him. Lewin quietly slipped away without waking her and found Dion and Smash already up and cleaning. That day, Dion came along as his escort while Lewin went plant collecting. Lewin found another dumbbell weed, a rare weed that boosts muscle strength, which he was really excited about since he wanted to test out its effects properly. His collecting speed impressed Dion a lot, and Lewin explained it came from his rare tier gift skill called Plant Master. Back at camp, Ahmed had clearly been chasing Smash around with a wooden sword while they were gone. She spotted Lewin, dropped the chase immediately, and ran over in a great mood. Lunch was another forced meat session. Ahmed finished the entire remaining pile of bear meat, then ran off to hunt something new without even letting Lewin answer when she asked if he wanted more. Dion and Smash gave Lewin a sympathetic look and basically told him Ahmed had taken a liking to him and that there wasn't much he could do about it. Smash joked that punching her might work. Nobody believed Lewin would survive that. Lewin shook it off and went back to collecting plants, this time with Smash as escort. He hit his goal of 4 gold coins during that session and just stopped counting after that. By evening, Ahmed was back with a massive beast called a deep boar. What followed was another huge feast. And once again, Lewin ended up eating until he collapsed and just stayed on the floor for the rest of the night. The third day on Mount Cornello went as smoothly as the second. Lewin finished his plant collecting and once again endured a massive meat feast hosted by Ahmed. Even though the heavy food was tough on him, Lewin felt he couldn't refuse her kindness, especially since he grew up in a place where food was a luxury. By the end of the day, he had collected twice as many plants as expected and felt a real bond growing with his guards. Dion and Smash had been helpful from the start, and even though Ahmed was loud and intense, Lewin realized she was a good person at heart. That night, Ahmed approached him, looking unusually calm. She told Lewin she had fun on this mission, which was rare for her. However, the mood shifted when she revealed that their group, the Azure Alliance, was being forced to leave the city of Grezesta. Ahmed explained that she had been kicked out of the local Adventurers Guild after a long-standing feud with her former A-rank party. Since the guild prioritized high-ranking members, her group took the fall. Lewin was crushed because he had finally found friends he could trust. Ahmed told him not to be sad, they weren't banned from the city itself, just the guild. She challenged him to get stronger so they could meet again as equals. The next morning, Lewin said his goodbyes to Dion and Smash. They were also sad to go, noting that Lewin was the first client who ever treated them with genuine respect. After one last trip up the mountain to gather herbs, the group headed back to the city. The walk back felt much shorter now that they were all friends. At the city gates, Lewin gave a heartfelt speech about how much they had changed his life, promising to find them again. Ahmed acted tough and told him to stop being embarrassing, but it was clear she cared. After Lewin entered the city, the trio went to the guild to finish the paperwork. As usual, the other adventurers mocked them, but they ignored the noise. When they received their payment, the receptionist handed over an extra bag. Inside, Lewin had left a gift of medicinal herbs and a beautiful bouquet of flowers. The three of them smiled, touched by the boy's kindness. Meanwhile, back at the Healers Guild, Brandon was living his best life. It had been 3 days since he fired Lewin, and he was busy celebrating by drinking expensive tea and laughing about how he ruined the peasant's life. He even thought about hiring more poor people just so he could enjoy the feeling of firing them later. His celebration was cut short when an employee burst into his office in a total panic. A new potion they had sent to the royal family had backfired horribly, leaving several people unconscious and in critical condition. It wasn't just the royals, either. Reports were flooding in from patients everywhere who were getting sick from their medicine. Brandon was furious and confused. He had designed the recipe perfectly, using a poisonous plant that was supposed to be neutralized into a healing agent. He couldn't understand how a mistake happened now that his team was perfect and Lewin was gone. He didn't realize that without Lewin's unique skill to spot tiny defects in the plants, the perfect team was accidentally brewing poison. As his world began to crumble, Brandon was forced to deal with the royal disaster he had created. Brandon was losing his mind. He slammed his desk in a rage, but the situation was a disaster. His guild, once famous for the best potions in the kingdom, had just suffered a massive failure with a new formula. Trying to stay calm, he ordered his healers to find out what went wrong. He convinced himself that one mistake wouldn't ruin his reputation, especially since he had already kicked out the incompetent peasant he blamed for his problems. Brandon headed to the capital with bribes and excuses, sure he could fix things. He didn't realize that without that specific person, his high-quality potions were gone for good, and the guild's success was about to tank. Meanwhile, Lewin returned to the city after 4 days on Mount Cornello. He was exhausted but proud, his bag stuffed with valuable herbs. After spending time around tough adventurers, he wasn't as intimidated by the crowd at the Adventurers Guild anymore. He officially reported his quest as finished and asked the receptionist about selling his herbs. Even though the guild took a 10% fee, Lewin decided to sell there to avoid any shops connected to Brandon's Healers Guild. He also left a gift of high-quality herbs for the party that protected him, feeling a bit shy about giving it to them directly. Back at a cheap inn, Lewin forced himself to stay awake to sort his haul. He took a cold shower to snap out of his tiredness and dumped the plants on the floor. The smell was intense, but the results were better than he imagined. After hours of work, he realized his collection was worth over 10 gold coins, more than double what he paid for his protection. For the first time, he felt like he actually had a future. However, he knew he was still physically weak. To protect himself from people like Brandon, he needed to get stronger. He finally decided to eat the rare dumbbell weed he had found. It tasted absolutely terrible, bitter, and numbing, and it left him in pain on the floor for a while. When he finally got up, he didn't feel any different. His arms were still thin and he wasn't any stronger. He figured the effect was either very small or would take time to show up. Disappointed but not defeated, he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Lewin felt refreshed and ready. He headed back to the Adventurers Guild to sell the lower quality herbs and use the money to buy magical grass to increase his mana. He met a friendly, bald staff member who was shocked by the sheer amount of plants Lewin had gathered. Since it was such a big haul, the man told Lewin it would take some time to price everything and suggested he grab a seat or come back later. Lewin waited, knowing this was the first real step toward his new life. After finishing up at the Adventurers Guild, Lewin decided to check out a shop he'd heard about called Elf's Tears. Back when he worked for the Healers Guild, he remembered this place being the only one able to provide top-quality herbs on short notice. Since he had some high-grade plants to sell, he hoped the owner would recognize their true value. He found the shop on the edge of town. It was much smaller than he expected, but it smelled amazing, not like the usual bitter herb smell, but something sweet and calming. Inside, he met the shopkeeper, an elderly elf woman with a kind face. When Lewin mentioned he wanted to sell herbs, her vibe changed instantly. She became very serious and warned him that she only cared about high quality. If his stuff was trash, she'd charge him a fee just for wasting her time. Lewin wasn't worried. He watched as she professionally tested his herbs by tasting the sap. She was impressed, noting that his plants were better than what she usually got from her private suppliers. As she went to the back to finish the appraisal, Lewin looked around the shop. He spotted a rare plant called immunity grass priced at 1 platinum coin, an insane amount of money he'd never even seen. He also looked for dumbbell weed, but the grandma didn't recognize the name, suggesting it might just be called bitterweed by locals. When she returned, she offered him 1 gold and 8 silver coins. Lewin was shocked. It was a huge amount. She explained that she knows how to sell quality goods for a premium. Lewin was so grateful he nearly bowed to the floor. When he introduced himself as Lewin Jade, the grandma realized he was the guy the Healers Guild had recently fired. Luckily, she hated the guild leader, Brandon, and told Lewin she was on his side. She even joked about selling low-quality trash back to the guild now that Lewin wasn't there to catch it. Feeling much better and with a heavy pocket full of coins, Lewin thanked her and left. He felt like he was finally seeing the real world after being stuck in a bad job for so long. He realized there were plenty of good people out there and felt more motivated than ever to grow stronger and explore. He headed back to the Adventurers Guild to pick up the payment for the lower quality herbs he left there earlier. He didn't really care how much they offered now since he already made a killing at the elf's shop. He pushed through the rowdy crowd, feeling a lot more confident than before. The bald employee he met earlier came out from the back with his bag, ready to give him the results. Lewin felt a bit nervous as he waited for the results of his plant appraisal. Luckily, the news was great. He earned 5 gold and 7 silver coins, which was more than enough to cover his needs without even selling his stash of magical grass. This meant he could keep the grass for himself to boost his magic power. However, there was a big problem. Magical grass tastes awful. It's incredibly bitter and nearly impossible to eat plain. To make it bearable, Lewin headed to the market to buy some ingredients like milk and honey to mask the flavor. He felt proud of his growing wealth, having turned his initial 2 gold coins into nearly 10. While walking through the market, Lewin was suddenly grabbed from behind in a huge hug. It was Ahmed, a female warrior from the Azure Alliance. She was accompanied by her teammates Dion and Smash. The group was messy and tired from a recent mission, but they were in high spirits. Smash tried to tease Lewin, which led to Ahmed playfully punching him and Dion. Lewin found their chaotic friendship entertaining, though he eventually had to head back to his inn to start his mission of eating the grass. Back at his room, Lewin began the grueling task of eating 142 portions of magical grass. He tried shredding it and washing it down with water, but the bitterness was overwhelming. After an hour, he had only finished 6 portions and felt like he was losing his mind. He tried mixing it with other foods, but most made it taste even worse. One attempt at grilling, the grass created such a horrific smell that the innkeeper came to complain. Eventually, he found that mixing it with stray cowbird's milk and killer bee honey was the only way to get it down. By the end of the first day, Lewin had forced down 50 portions. His stomach was in total pain and he felt sick, but he pushed through. To see if the effort was worth it, he tested his magic by synthesizing medical herbs. Usually, he could only make 3 before running out of energy and collapsing. This time, he made 6 before feeling tired. His magic capacity had already doubled. Over the next 4 days, Lewin finished the rest of the grass. It was a miserable experience that left him with constant stomach aches and malnutrition because he couldn't eat real food, but he didn't stop. By the time he was done, he had significantly increased his power. He realized that in the future, he should probably learn how to make potions instead of eating raw plants like a cow. With his grass finished and his stomach slowly recovering, Lewin headed back to the Adventurers Guild. He needed to hire another escort for his next trip to Mount Cornello. Since the Azure Alliance was busy preparing to leave town, he put in a general request for a 4-day mission, offering 4 gold coins as a reward. Back at the inn, Lewin decided to do a final test of his new limits. He used medical herbs as a base unit to measure his magic. Before this journey, his limit was 3. After the first day of eating, it was 6. By the time he finished all the high-quality grass on the final day, he managed to synthesize 14 herbs before collapsing from exhaustion. His hard work had paid off. His magical tank was now nearly 5 times larger than when he started. After 4 days of eating nothing but gross magical grass, Lewin managed to increase his magic capacity to 14. His stomach finally stopped hurting, and for the first time in a while, he felt great. He headed to the Adventurers Guild early to avoid the morning crowd and check on his request for an escort to Mount Cornello. The receptionist presented 3 options. First was Umbrella, an E-rank party that was stable but boring. Second was Iron Gear, a rookie F-rank group with a high success rate. The third was White Failure, a D-rank party that had recently been promoted. Even though they were expensive and had failed their promotion exams twice, Lewin chose them because he wanted the extra protection and didn't mind spending the 4 gold coins. He had some time to kill before the meeting, so he treated himself to a real meal and bought supplies like leather armor, a dagger, and slime liquid. When noon came, he waited at the guild, but White Failure was nowhere to be found. He waited for hours until the sun started to set. Finally, 4 guys with white headbands showed up, laughing and talking loudly. It turned out they were late on purpose because they were betting on whether Lewin would actually wait for them. They were rude and acted like jerks, making Lewin miss the professional vibe of his previous escort, the Azure Alliance. Despite their bad attitude, he needed them, so they agreed to start the journey the next morning. Back at the inn, Lewin experimented with his plant master ability. He discovered that synthesizing 1 magical grass cost 3 magic points. After making 4, he passed out from exhaustion, but he felt more prepared. The next day, the journey started badly. The White Failure members walked incredibly slowly and ignored Lewin's request to speed up. By the time they reached the base of Mount Cornello, it was already pitch black. They decided to push up the mountain anyway. While they were decent fighters, they had 0 teamwork and spent the whole time bragging about how easy the monsters were. Suddenly, a terrifying presence stopped them cold. An angry wolf, a powerful monster that usually stayed at the summit, appeared right in front of them. The adventurers panicked. Instead of protecting Lewin, the leader yelled for his team to run and use Lewin as a decoy. Within seconds, the professionals vanished into the woods, leaving Lewin alone with the beast. The wolf began to circle Lewin, growling low. Lewin was paralyzed with fear, even dropping his dagger as he realized he was about to be eaten. But then something clicked. He remembered the pain of eating magical grass and realized he didn't want to go out like this. He snapped out of his trance and came up with a desperate plan. Using his powers, he synthesized a magical grass and a bomb grass in his palm. He squeezed his hand shut, causing the bomb grass to explode. The blast burned his hand badly, but the pain gave him the focus he needed. He wasn't going to be a snack for some wolf without a fight. Lewin lit the magical grass and bomb grass together, creating a smell so foul it made his own stomach turn. The angry wolf, caught right in the path of the stink, hit the ground and started crying out in pain. Its scary roar turned into a weak whimper. Lewin knew the effect wouldn't last forever, so he acted fast. He took a bottle of slime liquid he had mixed with poisonous angel grass and threw it. The bottle smashed right on the wolf's forehead. At first, nothing happened, but then the wolf started losing its mind, rubbing its head against the dirt as the poison began to burn its skin. Lewin grabbed his dagger and rushed in. While the wolf was distracted by the pain, he drove the blade deep into its neck. The wolf struggled and tried to run, but it was blind, couldn't smell, and was losing blood fast. It finally collapsed and died. Lewin stood there shaking, shocked that he actually killed the beast. Realizing he was still in danger, he didn't stay to harvest the body. He found a tall tree and climbed up to hide for the night. When morning came, he realized he was totally lost. He knew the party that abandoned him, White Failure, wouldn't come back. He decided to stay put for 2 days, hoping for help while surviving on rations. To stay awake and prepared, Lewin spent his time collecting more plants. He realized the stinky magical grass was a great repellent, and the poisonous slime vials were his best weapon since he couldn't fight well. By the second night, he was exhausted. To stop himself from falling out of the tree in his sleep, he chewed on bitter magical grass to stay alert. Suddenly, the mountain went crazy. Monsters were running everywhere, and something big was coming his way, killing everything in its path. Lewin hid in the leaves, terrified it was a boss monster coming for revenge. The creature stopped right under his tree. Lewin held his breath, praying to stay hidden when a familiar voice called out. It was Ahmed. Overjoyed and crying, Lewin climbed down and hugged her. Ahmed acted tough and told him to stop being a baby, but she let him hop on her back to carry him to safety. Backtracking to that morning, Ahmed had woken up in a bad mood. She was part of the Azure Alliance party along with Dion and Smash. While at the Adventurers Guild, she spotted the White Failure members, the ones who had abandoned Lewin. They started mocking her party, calling them outcasts. Ahmed didn't take their trash talk for long. She grabbed their leader and punched him so hard his nose shattered. She then took out 2 more members with a slam and a high kick, leaving them unconscious on the floor. Just as she was about to finish off the last guy, Smash stopped her. He told her she'd done enough damage and they needed to focus on finding Lewin. After getting the truth out of the survivors, Ahmed had rushed to the mountain to bring the kid home. Ahmed was fuming. He had been so busy beating down the group of adventurers known as White Failure that he almost forgot to ask them where they left Lewin. Dion, Ahmed's level-headed companion, had to step in and stop him from landing a final lethal blow. One of the thugs, trembling in fear, finally confessed that they had lost sight of Lewin on Mount Cornello and just decided to come back home without him. The coward tried to lie and say they were just about to report it, but Ahmed and Dion knew better. These guys had been relaxing and chatting while their client was stranded. After getting the truth, Ahmed didn't hold back. He used a powerful move called the Strike of the Fire Dragon, hitting the thug with a fire-infused punch that left him with severe burns. Ahmed then did the same to the rest of the group to make sure they learned their lesson. Dion and their other friend, Smash, told Ahmed to head to the mountain immediately while they handled the guild paperwork. Ahmed sprinted for 3 hours straight, driven by a strange gut feeling that he had to save the kid. By the time he reached Mount Cornello, it was getting dark. Using his sharp senses and intuition, he eventually caught Lewin's scent and found him hiding at the top of a tree. When Lewin saw Ahmed, he broke down in tears and hugged him tightly. He had been terrified of the monsters and thought he'd never see home again. Ahmed acted tough, telling the boy to stop crying, but seeing Lewin so upset actually made his heart ache. He carried the exhausted boy back to town on his back, even though his own legs were covered in cuts from the frantic search. The next morning, after Lewin woke up in a nice inn Ahmed had paid for, the two talked. Ahmed told Lewin he shouldn't be so hard on himself. The fault was entirely on the White Failure party for abandoning him. Before they parted ways, Ahmed promised to settle things with those thugs for good. Lewin headed to the Adventurers Guild to officially report what happened. The receptionist was horrified by his story and immediately called for the guild chief. To Lewin's surprise, the chief turned out to be the same bald man who had helped him sell plants before. The chief didn't take the situation lightly. He explained that abandoning a client isn't just a mistake, it's a crime treated as seriously as attempted murder. He assured Lewin that the members of White Failure would be arrested and punished by the law. Lewin was shocked by how severe the consequences were, but he felt a massive weight lift off his shoulders, knowing he was finally safe. With the thugs facing prison, the chief prepared to discuss how the guild would make things right. The guild chief explained that leaving someone behind as a decoy is a serious crime, basically attempted murder. Lewin was surprised because, after years of being treated like trash at the Healers Guild, he had become numb to being the scapegoat. He realized that if he were still under his old bosses, his teammates would probably be praised for ditching him. The chief assured Lewin that he wasn't in trouble and promised to find him a top-tier party for future quests. As an apology for the mess, the guild also waived all his future fees and gave him a massive 20 gold coins as compensation. Lewin was thrilled, though the chief found his polite gratitude a bit weird given how badly he'd been treated. Lewin asked if he could work with the Azure Alliance again, but the chief said they were leaving town to start fresh in a new city. This was partly due to their rivalry with a high-ranking party called Azurite, which had caused them a lot of trouble. After finishing up with the receptionist, Lewin felt a huge weight lift off his shoulders. Even though his hands were still burned from the battle, he was now rich and safe. Exhausted from the mountain ordeal, he went back to his inn and slept for days. During the next 3 days, Lewin hung out with the Azure Alliance before their departure. They took him shopping, threw drinking parties, and showed him around the city. Smash, the group's sturdy warrior, showed him a hidden magic shop, while Dion, the stylish one, took him to a clothing store. They even gave him a crash course in sword fighting. While Dion and Smash were great teachers, Ahmed, the group's powerful but shy leader, mostly taught by using weird sound effects and gestures, which was hard to follow but cool to watch. On the day they left, Lewin saw them off at the gates. Ahmed was acting strangely quiet and wouldn't look at him, so Lewin handed her a parting gift through Dion. As they walked away, Lewin gathered his courage and shouted at the top of his lungs, thanking Ahmed for saving his life and promising to get strong enough to join her party one day. Without turning around, Ahmed gave him a firm thumbs up, which Dion explained was just her being shy. Lewin watched them disappear over the horizon, feeling like his life had finally changed for the better. Meanwhile, things were falling apart at the Healers Guild. Brandon, the arrogant guild chief, was losing his mind. Ever since he kicked Lewin out, the guild's new potions were failing and the other healers couldn't figure out why. To make matters worse, top adventure parties were canceling their contracts one by one. Brandon was furious, blaming everyone but himself and even physically hurting himself in fits of rage. A legendary elven medicine master named Irene Everett stopped by to drop off herbs and mocked Brandon for his incompetence, noticing how much he had aged from the stress. Just as Brandon reached his breaking point, a messenger from the royal family arrived. Brandon turned pale. He had used up all his money on bribes and expensive herbs, and now he had nothing left to offer the royals to cover up his failures. It was the beginning of the end for his leadership. Back at the inn, Ahmed was also feeling down about leaving. She had grown really fond of Lewin and secretly wanted him to join them, but she didn't know how to ask. Smash teased her about being soft, which she tried to hide behind her usual tough attitude. Despite the sadness of parting, both Lewin and Ahmed knew their paths would cross again once Lewin proved himself in the world of adventurers. Ahmed and the Azure Alliance were ready to leave the city. Ahmed was acting tough and impatient, but it was clear he was just trying to hide his emotions. As Dion finished the paperwork at the gate, Lewin showed up to say a final goodbye. He brought small gifts for everyone as a thank you for all their help. Ahmed couldn't even look Lewin in the eye because he was struggling not to cry. He stayed back, pretending to be annoyed while Dion took the gifts. Ahmed realized that Lewin was the first person to ever treat him like a normal human being rather than a monster. That kindness meant the world to him, and as they started walking away, Ahmed finally broke down in tears. Just as they were leaving, Lewin shouted out a heartfelt thank you, promising to get stronger and one day join their team. Hearing this, Ahmed gave a silent thumbs up, too choked up to speak. Once they were on the road, the group opened their gifts. Smash got high-quality gloves, Dion got a rare crafting material, and Ahmed, whose real name was revealed to be Alyssa, received a cute red hair clip she had secretly liked. The thoughtful gift made her smile through her tears, and the group headed off in better spirits. The next day, Lewin felt a bit lonely but knew he had to keep his promise. He spent the morning practicing his sword skills before heading to the Adventurers Guild. He needed to go back to Mount Cornello to gather more magical grass to grow his powers. Since he had been treated badly by his previous team, the guild chief had waived all his future booking fees and handpicked some reliable teams for him to hire. The receptionist suggested 3 options: a D-rank team with a perfect success rate, a veteran mentor named Edward who trained rookies, and an F-rank rookie team called Iron Gear. Lewin decided to go with Iron Gear because they had consistently tried to sign up for his requests before. He was shocked at how cheap it was to hire them, so he planned to give them a bonus if they did a good job. With the meeting set for noon, Lewin went to the market to restock. He bought food, water, and some slime liquid to create poison jars for self-defense. Finally, he headed to a shop called Iron Will, a place Ahmed had recommended for gear. After nearly losing his life last time, Lewin realized he couldn't just rely on others. He needed his own armor and weapons if he wanted to survive. Lewin pushed open the door to the shop and was immediately hit by the strong smell of iron and old blood. Weapons and armor were scattered everywhere on the counter, but the shopkeeper was nowhere to be seen. As Lewin reached out to touch a unique-looking blade, a loud roar came from the back. A short, hairy old man rushed out swinging a hammer, screaming at Lewin for touching his stuff. Lewin quickly raised his hands to show he wasn't a thief, explaining he just wanted to buy a weapon. The old man, named Dentetsu, immediately cooled down and started laughing. He apologized for the scare and became super friendly, even slapping Lewin on the back. When Lewin mentioned he was sent by the adventurer Ahmed, Dentetsu got even more excited. It turned out they were good friends. Dentetsu helped Lewin pick out a sharp steel sword and a chest plate made of light metal, which was incredibly light but strong. He even gave Lewin a big discount and a free scabbard. Lewin left the shop feeling great, hoping to train hard enough to use the sword as well as Ahmed does. He headed back to the Adventurers Guild to meet the party he hired for his next trip to Mount Cornello. The group called Iron Gear consisted of 4 young adventurers around his age: Bayan, Lyra, Porta, and a very shy girl named Nina. Lyra was full of energy and super happy that Lewin finally picked their request. Bayan was the more grounded leader, while Porta was laid back. Nina didn't say much, but the team explained she had a unique skill called anti-heal that made her their best member. They spent some time chatting and getting to know each other. Since they were all close in age, the vibe was much more relaxed than Lewin's previous experiences. They agreed to meet the next morning for the trip. Back at his inn, Lewin experimented with his plant master skill. He tried to make angel grass but realized it took a lot of his magic power, leaving him exhausted after making just one. The next morning, he did some light sword practice in the courtyard. He noticed a beautiful blue-haired woman in heavy armor watching him. She looked like a high-level knight of the royal order, someone way out of his league. He wanted to talk to her, but he didn't have the guts. Soon, it was time to meet Iron Gear at the guild. They were already there, waiting early. Lyra and Bayan were jokingly bickering, which made Lewin feel right at home. They decided to drop the formal talk and just use each other's names. Even Nina, despite her blushing and shyness, managed to tell Lewin it was okay to just call her Nina. With the team ready and the mood high, they prepared to head out on their journey. On the way to Mount Cornello, the members of Iron Gear shared their story. The group consists of 4 former military academy students: Nina, Lyra, Bayan, and Portas. Nina had been unfairly expelled due to a mysterious incident, and the other 3 dropped out of school just to stay by her side. They eventually moved to the city of Grezista to become adventurers. While Lyra and Bayan had passed the entrance exams normally, Nina and Porta were recruited because of their unique skills. Listening to their fun school stories made the past 5 years at the Healers Guild feel even more like a nightmare. However, that time wasn't a total waste. It helped improve the plant appraisal skills and mental toughness needed for the current journey. Once they arrived at the mountain, the group reminisced about a failed water-carrying quest before asking why an ordinary guy like this would need an escort to such a place. When they found out the goal was just gathering herbs, they were confused since the cost of the escort seemed higher than the profit. Porta suggested they move to the middle of the mountain before talking more, as the area was crawling with monsters. As they climbed, a group of kobolds and werewolves attacked. Iron Gear showed off their perfect teamwork. Lyra and Bayan took the front while Porta and Nina handled the back. Nina was the star of the fight. She used her magic to blast a kobold, and then used a clever curving shot over Bayan's head to hit a werewolf by surprise. Her shy personality completely vanished during the fight, replaced by a confident leader. They reached a safe clearing near a stream to set up camp. While Lyra and Nina started on the tents, Bayan and Porta went along to provide security for the herb gathering. During the walk, Porta explained that he is a buff mage, a rare class that focuses on making allies stronger and enemies weaker rather than using direct attack magic. The herb gathering went incredibly fast. In just 30 minutes, the bag was full of medical plants. Bayan was shocked at the speed, unable to understand how anyone could tell the difference between a rare herb and a common weed so quickly. It was time to come clean. The secret was a rare skill called Plant Master that allows for instant appraisal. Hearing about this powerful skill, Porta immediately asked for a spot in the party. It was a tempting offer, but the heart was already set on joining a different group. Instead, a new deal was proposed. An exclusive contract where Iron Gear would be the permanent escort for all future trips, paid at a high rate of 4 gold coins per mission. Porta was thrilled by the money, while Bayan was just confused by the math. By the end of the day, the harvest was massive. The haul included over 100 herbs, several rare plants, and most importantly, another stock of the extremely rare dumbbell weed. With 2 stocks now secured, the mission was proving to be a huge success. After finishing his work, Lewin started testing the new plants he found on the mountain. He tried a peppercorn berry, which was incredibly spicy. He remembered seeing similar plants before, but ignored them because they didn't seem useful for fighting monsters. However, the second plant, called glutamate herb, was a game changer. When he tasted a piece, it was packed with a rich, delicious, savory flavor. He was thrilled to find something that could make food taste better, though the plant was rare and hard to find. Lewin headed back to camp to meet Bayan and Porta. Bayan was now fully on board with their new partnership. They officially agreed that Lewin would hire their party Iron Gear as his permanent escorts for gathering trips. This deal was perfect for everyone. Lewin got reliable protection, and the adventurers got steady pay so they wouldn't have to struggle with low-paying random jobs anymore. At the campsite, the 2 female members of the party, Nina the quiet cook and Lyra the energetic one, had prepared a hot meal. Lyra proudly showed off the 9 herbs she gathered, thinking it was a great haul. To her shock, Lewin opened his bag to reveal over 100 high-quality herbs. He explained that his rare skill allowed him to find and pick plants at high speeds. This impressed the group even more, and they sat down to eat together. The soup was incredible. Lyra explained that the secret was using red-hot herbs as a spice. This was an eye-opener for Lewin. He realized that useless spicy plants were actually valuable for cooking. This discovery made him appreciate his plant master skill even more, seeing its potential for growth, combat, and now, daily life. As they sat by the fire, the conversation turned serious. Lewin shared his past, explaining how he had been stuck in a dead-end job at the Healers Guild for 5 years. Even though he had a rare skill, his bosses treated him poorly and eventually fired him because he could only appraise plants and not do anything else. Hearing this, Porta stood up and apologized. He felt bad because he had initially invited Lewin to join the party just because of his rare skill, which felt like the same kind of exploitation Lewin had suffered at the guild. Lewin told him not to worry, saying he was actually happy to be wanted. He knew his skill was his greatest strength and was determined to use it to become stronger. The group ended the night on a high note, feeling more like a real team than ever before. Lyra finally caught up with the group, annoyed at being left out of the loop. Porta and Bayan explained that they had signed an exclusive contract to protect Lewin on his future trips. Lyra was thrilled, especially after hearing how badly the Healers Guild had treated him. Bayan and Lyra were so angry on Lewin's behalf that they actually started planning how to beat up his old boss, Brandon. Lewin had to step in and stop them, explaining that being fired was actually a blessing because it led him to meet them. As the night wound down, Lewin stepped away to boil some glutamate herb he had found. Lyra followed him, curious about his formal way of speaking. Lewin admitted he was just trying to be polite, but Lyra insisted they were friends now and should talk casually. After a slightly awkward attempt at sounding cool, Lewin relaxed and shared the herbal stock he'd made. The taste was incredible, way better than when raw. Lyra was so impressed she suggested that she and Nina help him identify which plants are good for cooking in the future. The next morning, the smell of breakfast woke everyone up. Lyra and Nina had used Lewin's herbal stock to make a soup that tasted like professional high-end cooking. Bayan and Porta were blown away, and Lyra whispered to Lewin that these herbs could probably sell for a lot of money. This gave Lewin a fresh burst of motivation. On the second day of gathering, Lewin focused on flavor-related plants. He found peppercorns, ginger, and cumin, though they tasted pretty bad when he tried them raw. Back at camp, Nina and Lyra checked his haul and confirmed they were all valuable spices. Nina even broke down the prices, explaining that peppercorns alone were worth a silver coin each. Lewin realized his profit from this trip was going to be way higher than he expected. After a great dinner, Lewin went to bed feeling successful, but his peace didn't last long. In the middle of the night, a sudden chill ran down his spine. The forest went dead silent. Then, a massive, soul-shaking roar ripped through the air. It was an angry wolf. Lewin didn't let panic take over. He stayed calm, woke up Bayan, and called Porta into the tent. While the seasoned fighters hadn't sensed the danger yet, Lewin was certain he had dealt with these monsters before. He grabbed his gear, including some magical grass for a distraction, and went to wake up Lyra and Nina. Even though it felt awkward entering their tent, he knew there was no time to waste. An emergency was unfolding and they needed to be ready for a fight. Nina woke up calmly, but Lyra panicked the moment she saw Lewin. Lewin quickly silenced her, pointing out that a dangerous monster was nearby and they needed to move fast. After a quick explanation, the girls got ready while Lewin joined Bayan and Porta outside. The 2 seasoned adventurers were already on high alert. Bayan had his sword drawn, and Porta was sweating, sensing multiple creatures signaling each other in the dark. Lewin felt a wave of pure terror. The situation reminded him too much of the time he was abandoned during a monster attack. His legs shook and he started hyperventilating, trapped in a flashback of his past trauma. Bayan and Porta noticed his state and immediately reassured him, promising they wouldn't leave him behind. To snap out of it, Lewin bit his tongue hard, using the sharp pain to focus. The group began a frantic retreat down Mount Cornello. The pressure was intense, Lyra kept stumbling and the boys were breathing hard as the monsters closed in. Sensing the group's spirit breaking, Nina spoke up with surprising authority. She reminded them that her magic could handle any monster in their path and urged them to stay calm. Her confidence worked, and they managed to reach the foot of the mountain safely, using some burning magical grass to mask their scent and throw off the pack. Safe for a moment, the group discussed their next move. They had lost most of their gear during the escape, but Porta and Bayan prioritized Lewin's safety over the failed mission. This touched Lewin deeply. Unlike his previous companions, these people actually cared about his life. Their relief was short-lived. A loud roar echoed nearby as a lone angry wolf emerged from the shadows. Strangely, it ignored the others and stared directly at Lewin. Nina realized the beast was likely seeking revenge for the wolf Lewin had killed previously. Seeing the beast's hatred, Lewin steeled himself. He wasn't going to die here. The battle began with Bayan and Lyra rushing the wolf. They used a combination of heavy slashes and low strikes, but the wolf was incredibly fast, dodging their moves and nearly counterattacking Lyra. Nina saved her with a well-timed spell that forced the wolf back. Despite their teamwork, the wolf seemed resistant to Porta's slowing magic and kept its eyes locked on Lewin. Lewin decided to step up, igniting a bundle of foul-smelling magical grass to disorient the beast. As the wolf lunged with insane speed, Lewin tried to throw a vial of poison, but the creature predicted his move and dodged. Lewin fell back, paralyzed with fear as the wolf's jaws snapped inches from his face. Just as death seemed certain, Nina fired a magic orb into the wolf's mouth, blowing it back. Even with its jaw shattered and blood in its eyes, the wolf dragged itself toward Lewin with pure murderous intent. Bayan jumped in, landing a massive blow to its chest, but the wolf ignored the wound, still trying to reach Lewin. Finally, Lyra and Porta landed a combined strike that sent the wolf spinning into the dirt. Bayan finished it off with a final thrust to the heart. Silence fell over the group. Lewin sat on the ground, trembling. This wolf hadn't seen him as food, it had seen him as a mortal enemy. Nina checked on Lewin, healing his minor shocks. She insisted that they failed as escorts by letting him get into danger, but Lewin knew the truth. If he hadn't acted as a distraction, and if they hadn't fought so hard together, none of them would have made it out alive. Despite the loss of their equipment, Lewin realized he had finally found a team he could truly trust. After the fight, Lewin and the party from Iron Gear stood over the fallen, angry wolf. Everyone was safe, but Lewin couldn't help feeling a bit guilty about how close things had been. Nina and the others quickly shut down his self-blame, reminding him that taking down a C-rank monster without a single scratch was a huge win. The group decided to dismantle the wolf right there. Lyra, the energetic archer, explained that even though the wolf wasn't massive, its claws, fangs, and fur were worth a lot of money. While Bayan, the dependable leader of Iron Gear, handled the heavy work, Nina took care of Porta, who was exhausted from pushing his body to the limit during the final blow. As Lewin helped, he noticed the wolf looked much less intimidating now that it wasn't trying to kill him. He realized he had slipped back into formal speech out of nerves, and Lyra teased him for being a weirdo, telling him to just relax and talk to them like friends. Back in the city of Grezista, the group prepared to part ways. Even though the mission ended early, Lewin let the party keep most of the expensive wolf materials to cover their costs, only taking one fang and one claw for himself. He planned to turn the fang into a new harvesting knife. They agreed to meet again, as Lewin was so impressed by their teamwork that he wanted to hire them exclusively for future trips. Lewin headed back to his room at the rundown inn to experiment with his new find, the glutamate herb. Using his plant master skill, he found he could synthesize the herb fairly easily. He tried 3 different ways to cook it, simmering it, chopping it into a broth, and drying it. The taste was incredible, packed with a savory flavor that made him feel like he'd hit a gold mine. However, his attempt to use that flavor to mask the horrible bitterness of his dumbbell weed medicine was a total failure. The medicine was so bitter it made him sick for an hour, proving nothing could hide its nasty taste. The next morning, Lewin went to the Adventurers Guild to finalize the paperwork. The guild chief, a loud but well-meaning bald man, was already waiting. He felt terrible that Lewin's trip had been cut short again, and even sent a high-ranking A-rank team to retrieve Lewin's lost bag from the mountain. The chief insisted on paying Lewin a large compensation fee of 5 gold coins. Lewin tried to refuse, saying Iron Gear did a perfect job, but the chief wouldn't take no for an answer. Instead, Lewin asked the chief to make sure Iron Gear got a promotion and a raise for their hard work. Finally, Lewin asked the most important question: why was Mount Cornello suddenly so dangerous? The chief explained that the balance of power on the mountain had collapsed. Apparently, someone had killed the boss of the local anchor bears recently. Without a boss to keep them in check, the packs of angry wolves were now running wild and claiming new territory. Lewin realized with a start that the giant bear his previous group had killed and eaten was likely the boss, meaning he was indirectly responsible for the chaos. Despite the danger, the chief told him he could still visit the mountain, but he'd need to be much more careful from now on. Lewin met with the guild chief to get an update on the forest situation. It turned out the balance of power had shifted because the local bears were losing out to the wolves, causing the wolf attacks. The chief advised Lewin to wait a few weeks for things to settle down before heading back to Mount Cornello to gather herbs. Since Lewin had a decent stock of supplies, he decided to stay in the city and focus on training for a while. The guild worked surprisingly fast, as they had already retrieved Lewin's bag from the forest. This was thanks to a high-ranking adventurer party called Azurite. Lewin felt a bit awkward because his mentor, Ahmed, had a rough history with that group, but he was still grateful to have his gear back. Back at his inn, Lewin sorted through his haul. Between the compensation for the failed quest and the value of his new herbs and spices, he was looking at a profit of nearly 10 gold coins. This was a huge win, and he planned to share some of the extra cash with Lyra and Nina, the adventurers who had protected him during the wolf attack. Later, Lewin visited Elf's Tears to sell his best herbs. The shop owner, a kind old lady, welcomed him warmly. She revealed that the rare herbs he brought last time had already sold out, which was a relief since Lewin had worried they were too expensive for her to move. During their chat, Lewin noticed her walking cane and offered to help her carry things, thinking she had a bad leg. To his surprise, she slammed the cane down, revealing it was actually a hidden sword for self-defense. She was perfectly healthy and just used the cane as a clever way to stay armed. While waiting for her to value his herbs, Lewin spotted a top-grade magic potion priced at 9 gold coins. It was way too expensive to buy, but it got him thinking. He wondered if drinking magic potions would increase his total mana more effectively than just eating raw magic grass. To test this theory, he bought 3 low-grade magic potions for over a gold coin. Even though they were double the market price, he trusted the grandma's quality. Lewin then asked her if there was any way to mask the bitter taste of medicinal plants. She didn't have a perfect solution, but suggested that strong spices might help cover the flavor. She also mentioned that the best way to handle bitter herbs is to brew them into potions. She even jokingly offered to take Lewin on as her apprentice to teach him the craft. Lewin was tempted because he loved the shop, but he turned her down for now. He explained that he had a dream to travel the world with Ahmed first, though he promised to come back and learn from her once that journey was over. As Lewin prepared to leave for his next meeting, the grandma stopped him. She mentioned she had recently visited the Healers Guild, the place Lewin had been fired from to sell some supplies. She had picked up some juicy gossip about a major problem involving Brandon, the man responsible for Lewin's troubles, who had recently been summoned to the royal capital to answer for his actions. The local shopkeeper, a grandma who always knew the latest gossip, filled Lewin in on the chaos at the Healers Guild. It turned out the guild chief, Brandon, had messed up big time. He tried to sell a new high-powered potion to the royalty, but he failed to remove the poison from the low-quality herbs used to make it. When the royal messengers showed up for a surprise test, the potion failed miserably, causing bad side effects. Now Brandon is facing arrest, and the guild is likely going to shut down. Lewin felt a huge sense of relief. If he hadn't been fired a month ago, Brandon definitely would have blamed the whole disaster on him. After leaving the shop, Lewin headed to the Bee House Inn to meet Lyra and Nina. When he arrived, he was surprised to see them out of their adventurer gear. Lyra was wearing a stylish sleeveless top and shorts, while Nina looked like a princess in a white dress. Seeing them dressed up made Lewin realize he probably needed some new clothes too, as he was still wearing his basic work gear. The group headed to a shop owned by a man named Clive. Clive was a tall, shady-looking guy with an eye patch and a black hat, but he clearly knew his stuff. When Lewin showed him the spices he had gathered, pepper, ginger, cumin, and laurel, Clive was impressed. He offered Lewin 5 gold coins for the batch. Lewin was shocked. He didn't even like the taste of these plants, yet they were worth more than most medical herbs. While they were there, Lewin asked about a mysterious dish he'd heard could mask the bitter taste of gross medicinal weeds. Nina immediately guessed he was talking about curry. Clive confirmed it and offered to teach Lewin how to make it. They gathered extra ingredients like red-hot herb, turmeric, and coriander. Clive led them to his kitchen, which was surprisingly spotless compared to his messy shop. As he rolled up his sleeves, Lewin noticed his arms were covered in old battle scars, showing he had a rough past. With a serious look in his eyes, Clive started the lesson, and the group began cooking the spicy dish together. Nina started by frying vegetables and spices until they turned dark and rich. The shopkeeper, Clive, then mixed them into a smooth paste, filling the kitchen with an amazing smell. After adding water and letting it simmer, the dish was finally ready. Clive called it curry and served it with fresh bread. Lewin took his first bite and was blown away. It was spicy enough to make him sweat, but so delicious that he cleaned his plate instantly. He realized this flavorful curry was the perfect way to mask the bitter taste of the dumbbell weed he needed to eat to get stronger. After the meal, Lewin showed Clive a plant called glutamate herb. Clive hadn't seen it before but was intrigued by its potential to improve food. He offered Lewin 5 silver coins per stalk, which was a huge amount. Lewin realized that if he used his magic to create these herbs every day, he'd never have to worry about money again. He ended up making over 7 gold coins from his sales that day. Before leaving, Nina and Lyra promised to make him their own versions of curry next time, and Lewin promised to hire their team, Iron Gear, for his next adventure. Back at his inn, Lewin got to work. He made his own batch of curry and mixed in the powdered dumbbell weed. To his relief, the spices balanced out the bitterness perfectly. He could finally eat his power-up medicine without feeling sick. Next, he tested the magic potions he bought from the shop Elf's Tears. Unlike the bitter ones he'd had years ago, these were sweet and refreshing. After drinking 3 bottles, he tested his magic by creating plants. He found that his total magic capacity had increased by 3 points. It was more expensive than eating raw grass, but way less painful. The next morning, Lewin felt faster and stronger during his sword practice. With 40 gold coins now in his pocket thanks to his recent sales, he felt rich and motivated. He decided his new goal was to use his extra cash to buy as many magic potions as possible to max out his power. He headed back to the Adventurers Guild to sell some low-grade herbs before planning a big deal with the grandma at Elf's Tears to turn his raw materials into high-quality potions. Lewin had some extra cash now, which meant he could finally focus on his own goals. He headed back to the potion shop, Elf's Tears, feeling a bit awkward since he made such a dramatic exit the day before. Inside, he met the shop's owner, a kind old lady who was actually behind the counter for once. Lewin told her how much he loved her potions, especially the taste. The grandma explained that she used a special secret formula that made them both delicious and more effective than regular ones. Since Lewin was a regular who supplied her with high-quality herbs, she agreed to a special deal. If he brought her the raw magical grass, she'd brew the potions for a small fee of 1 silver coin each. She warned him that the quality of the grass determined the quality of the potion, but using only grass would never result in the highest-tier stuff. While they talked, Lewin noticed a glowing top-tier potion on the shelf. Grandma explained that the best potions required a rare plant called Demonstar herb, which only grows in dungeons, dangerous places packed with magic and monsters. Lewin had never heard of dungeons before, but he realized he had a long way to go before he could handle places like that. He ended up buying 30 gold coins worth of various potions to boost his strength. Back at his inn, Lewin started his experiment. He spent the entire day drinking the potions to increase his internal magic capacity. He discovered that the cheapest, minimum-grade potions were actually the most cost-effective for growing his power, even if they didn't taste as good as the premium ones. After days of non-stop drinking and training, his magic capacity jumped from a measly 17 to a solid 79. Now came the real test. Lewin wanted to see if he could finally use his plant master skill to create a dumbbell weed, a high-level plant used for muscle strengthening. This was the goal he had been working toward for a month. He lay on his bed, focused all his energy on his palm, and felt a massive amount of power being sucked out of him. His hand shook from the pressure, but suddenly the sensation stopped. Opening his eyes, he saw a fresh dumbbell weed in his hand. He had done it. This was a huge milestone for him, and for a moment, he got emotional thinking about how far he'd come since leaving the Healers Guild. But he quickly pulled himself together. Creating one weed was just the start. He had a promise to keep to his friend Ahmed and a lot more growing to do. He immediately started testing more herbs to see exactly how much energy that one creation had cost him. Lewin was pushing his limits. While synthesizing medical herbs, he realized that making the high-level dumbbell weed was a massive drain on his energy, costing 75 units of magic power. This meant he could only produce one a day. His plan was simple: synthesize one daily, dry it out, and eat it the next day mixed into a curry to gain strength. The only problem was the cost of spices, but he hoped to cover that by selling glutamate herbs, which he predicted would bring in a steady income. Determined to catch up to his rival Ahmed, Lewin set a busy schedule. The next morning, after 3 hours of sword practice, he headed into town to finish his errands. His first stop was Iron Will, the blacksmith shop. He wanted to turn an angry wolf fang he had found into a custom knife. Dantetsu, the loud and energetic blacksmith, agreed to do it, mentioning that providing the materials would save Lewin some serious cash. Next, Lewin visited Elf's Tears to pick up potions from the shopkeeper grandma. She had brewed various grades of magic potions using the herbs he provided. Lewin realized that his plant master ability was perfect for potion making, and although he was tempted to study it further, he knew he had to focus on getting stronger first. The grandma was surprisingly kind, even agreeing to save low-quality plants for him that she usually dumped on the Healers Guild. With his new potions in hand, Lewin's magic capacity jumped to 87 units, enough to finally synthesize both a dumbbell weed and a glutamate herb every single day. His final stop was Clive's spice shop. When Lewin arrived, Clive looked like a ghost, bloodshot eyes, messy hair, and completely exhausted. He hadn't slept for 4 days because he was obsessed with experimenting with the glutamate herb Lewin gave him. Clive revealed that the herb was a game-changer for the cooking world. He promised to keep buying them at a high price of 5 silver coins each, even suggesting he might eventually need thousands of them. With his errands done, Lewin headed back to his inn. He had spent a big chunk of his savings, 4 gold coins, on a bulk supply of curry spices, leaving him with only 6 gold coins. It was a risky investment, but he knew he could always synthesize more glutamate herbs if he needed quick cash. Now everything was ready. Lewin prepped his ingredients for the next day, drank his capacity-boosting potions, and began his nightly routine. As he focused his energy, he felt the familiar drain of magic leaving his body, officially starting his month-long journey of intense training to transform himself from the weakest link into a true warrior. Irene didn't even blink. Brandon's punch was slow, sloppy, and reeked of alcohol. She lightly tilted her head, letting the fist whistle past her ear, and then she drove her palm hard into his chest. The impact sent Brandon flying backward, crashing through a wooden table and landing in a heap of broken splinters and spilled beer. The entire bar went silent. The thugs who were eyeing Irene earlier suddenly looked away, realizing she wasn't some helpless old lady. Brandon groaned, struggling to crawl out from the wreckage, his face a mess of tears and snot. He looked pathetic, a man who once held power now shivering on a dirty floor in the slums. Irene walked over and stood over him, her shadow covering his trembling body. She told him straight up that his downfall wasn't because of Lewin or bad luck. It was because he was a small, arrogant man who couldn't handle his own job. She warned him that if he ever tried to go after Lewin or even mentioned his name again, she wouldn't just push him next time, she would end him for good. Brandon couldn't even find the words to talk back. He just curled into a ball, sobbing about his lost noble status. Seeing him like this, Irene felt a mix of satisfaction and disgust. She had seen enough. She turned around and walked out of the bar, the heavy door creaking shut behind her. As she walked through the dark alleys of the slums, Irene felt a bit lighter. She had defended Lewin's honor and seen the man who bullied him lose everything. However, she knew Brandon was the type to hold a grudge, even if he was powerless now. She decided she would keep a close eye on things and make sure Charlotte knew the Healers Guild was basically a sinking ship. The next morning, Irene was back at her shop feeling refreshed. She realized that while she enjoyed her quiet life, protecting the people she cared about gave her a different kind of energy. She looked at the empty chair where Lewin usually sat and smiled, looking forward to the day he'd return, so she could tell him that the man who made his life miserable was now nothing more than a joke in a basement bar. For now, she went back to her potions, peaceful but ready for whatever came next. Irene stood her ground as Brandon, a cocky bully, swung a massive punch at her. Even though she could have ended the fight instantly, she intentionally took the hit to act like a victim. She faked flying backward from the impact, making the crowd and even the bar owner cheer for Brandon. Brandon started gloating, calling her a SHTTY old hag, not realizing Irene was completely unharmed and just setting him up. When she had her alibi, Irene stood up, brushed off the dust, and walked straight toward him with a calm smile. Brandon's face froze when he realized his punch did nothing. Before he could react, Irene drove her cane hard into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. She didn't stop there. She systematically dislocated both his shoulders and hit his thighs until his legs gave out. She finished the beatdown with a sharp uppercut to his jaw, leaving him face down on the ground in a pool of blood. To make sure the message stuck, Irene dumped a bucket of water on him to wake him up. Terrified and unable to move his broken limbs, Brandon tried to crawl away. Irene leaned in and warned him that if he ever touched her friend Lewin again, she would kill him. Brandon nodded frantically, completely broken. Satisfied, Irene tossed a gold coin to the owner for the mess and left. Shortly after, Brandon was so scared that he left town for good. Meanwhile, Lewin had spent the last month in intense training. He had been eating a special plant called dumbbell weed and practicing his sword skills every single day. His body had transformed from thin and weak to noticeably muscular, and he could finally handle a heavy steel sword. Feeling good about his progress, he decided to take a break from his solo training to go herb gathering. He met up with his old friends, the Iron Gear Adventuring Party. They were shocked to see how much he had changed. Lyra couldn't believe his transformation, and Porta was so jealous he started poking Lewin's new muscles, begging to know his secret. Lewin just laughed it off, happy to be back with the group. They planned a new mission for the next day. Initially, they considered going to Nava Forest, but Nina, the party's cautious member, warned them about brutal Kongs, dangerous B-rank monsters that were even scarier than the wolves they fought before. To stay safe, they decided to stick to Mount Cornello instead. The next morning, Lewin geared up with his new chestplate, his steel sword, and a custom knife. He met Iron Gear at the guild and they headed out. On the way, they celebrated the fact that the party had recently been promoted to E-rank, which meant better pay and more respect. As they reached the base of Mount Cornello, everyone felt a bit nervous. The last time they were here, they almost died running from a pack of angry wolves. However, Nina calmed everyone down, reminding them that they had survived before and were stronger now. With their heads held high, they stepped back into the mountain to start their hunt. The group reached the halfway point of Mount Cornello without any trouble. Everything felt peaceful, so they decided to stick to their usual plan. Lyra and Nina stayed back to set up camp and cook, while Bayan and Porta escorted Lewin to gather plants. As they walked, Bayan noticed how much Lewin's body had changed and asked what he'd been doing. Lewin explained his brutal training routine, pushing himself to the point of injury and then using recovery slime to heal, repeating the cycle for a month. Bayan felt a bit guilty, thinking Lewin trained so hard because the team hadn't protected him well enough last time. But Lewin reassured him that he just wanted to be stronger for himself. The next 3 days were a huge success. Lewin gathered a record amount of herbs, including rare spices and his favorite dumbbell weed. The atmosphere was great, the food was delicious, and it seemed like a perfect trip. But on the final night, Lewin's instincts suddenly spiked. He felt a terrifying presence he knew all too well. An angry wolf was nearby. He quickly woke the others. Unlike last time, they realized they were being surrounded. Howls came from 3 different directions, including the path leading down the mountain. They were trapped. Bayan and Lyra wanted to run, but Lewin pointed out that fighting in a clearing gave them a better shot than being ambushed on a narrow trail. Lewin noticed something weird. The wolves seemed to be specifically targeting him. He proposed a risky plan. He would act as a bait in the open while the rest of the team hid. To mask their scent, they burned a bunch of magical grass, creating a stinking smoke screen that would confuse the wolves' noses. Standing alone in the clearing, Lewin saw a silver-furred angry wolf emerge. It was a terrifying sight, but this time Lewin was ready. As the wolf charged, he sprinted toward a rock where his team was waiting. The wolf was incredibly fast and gained on him instantly. Realizing he wouldn't make it to the hiding spot in time, Lewin made a split-second move. He planted his feet, spun around, and drew his sword in one smooth motion. He swung with everything he had, hoping just to distract the beast. Instead, his blade sliced clean through the wolf's head, ending it instantly. Lewin stood there in shock, barely feeling the impact because the cut was so clean. He looked down at his bloody sword, stunned by his own new strength. The other 2 wolves who were closing in to join the attack suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. Seeing their comrade taken down so easily by a single human, they stood frozen, staring at Lewin in total silence. After taking down an angry wolf in one clean hit, Lewin stood his ground against the remaining 2 wolves. He was actually terrified, knowing he probably couldn't pull off a move like that again, but he kept his sword ready and glared them down. His teammates Lyra and Bayan finally caught up, shocked to see Lewin had handled a monster of that level all by himself. Sensing the danger and seeing their friend's incredible feat, the other wolves eventually got scared and ran off into the woods. Once the threat was gone, Lewin collapsed from exhaustion. This was his 3rd close call with death, and he felt like he was only alive because of pure luck. Lyra was incredibly hyped, praising his cool move of splitting the wolf's head open, but she quickly turned tearful. She felt guilty because their plan to use Lewin as a decoy almost got him killed. Lewin, being a good guy, apologized too, admitting his own strategy was risky. Later, the rest of the team, Nina and Porta, joined them and they all headed back to the city of Grezista. Back in town, the group talked about how weak they felt. Even though they were E-rank adventurers, they realized they were protected by the person they were supposed to be guarding. Nina and the others promised to train harder so they could actually stand by Lewin's side as equals next time. Lewin headed back to his inn to sleep off the fatigue, but he couldn't stop thinking about that one perfect strike. He spent the next week trying to do it again, but he couldn't. He realized he only pulled it off because of the extreme pressure of the moment. Meanwhile, a mysterious woman had been watching Lewin during her daily morning runs. She was an experienced fighter who had used the same secluded route for years. At first, she found Lewin's presence annoying and his sword swings childish. But as weeks passed, she noticed his speed increasing at a crazy rate. She could see he had massive talent but zero foundation, making his movements messy and full of openings. It physically pained her to watch such good potential go to waste, and she found herself wanting to step in and teach him the basics from scratch. 3 months passed like this. Lewin continued his intense training and went on monthly gathering quests with iron gear. Luckily, the wolves didn't attack again, but Lewin felt confident he could handle one now. Iron Gear was also pushing themselves harder than ever, inspired by Lewin's growth. Even though Lewin still couldn't replicate that perfect strike on command, his overall strength was reaching a point where he was no longer just a lucky beginner. He was becoming a real threat, and the people around him were starting to notice that his potential was far beyond a normal adventurer. Lewin felt a bit left behind. For the last 3 months, his friends in the Iron Gear party had been training like crazy under a top-tier mentor named Edward. Every time Lewin saw them, they were faster and more coordinated. They even took down a C-rank monster recently. Lewin worked just as hard, but even with his special diet of dumbbell weed to boost his strength, he wasn't improving as fast as them. He realized that having a teacher made a huge difference. One morning, while practicing his sword swings outside his inn, he noticed a familiar face. A woman from the Royal Knights had been watching him lately. At first, she just ran past, but now she was literally hiding behind a building across the street, staring at him. She was cold and dignified, but her intense gaze made Lewin so nervous that he couldn't focus on his training. Looking for advice, Lewin visited an old lady he knew at a shop called Elf's Tears. She was a pro at making potions and always had the best info. After picking up some high-grade magic potions, Lewin asked her if she knew anyone who could teach him how to use a sword properly. The old lady suggested that instead of shady freelancers, he should try asking the kingdom's soldiers or the Royal Knights. They sometimes trained outsiders if the price was right. This gave Lewin an idea. Maybe that woman watching him every morning wasn't just being weird, maybe she was interested in his potential. The next morning, Lewin caught her staring again. He walked straight up to her, which sent her into a total panic. This cool knight captain, whose name was Iris Curdy, started stuttering and making up excuses about how she just happened to be passing by. She was so flustered she even accidentally showed him her ID papers while trying to act official. To calm her down, Lewin invited her to his room at the inn for some tea. Once she settled in, her dignified personality came back, though she was still a bit red in the face. Lewin finally asked her why she was stalking his morning workouts. Curdy admitted she was watching his swordsmanship, but she didn't exactly give him a compliment. She called his moves child's play and said he had a lot of bad habits and wasted energy. However, she did admit that he clearly had natural talent for fighting. It bothered her to see someone with so much potential wasting it because they didn't have a proper teacher. She told him straight up, if he had a mentor, he could be so much better. Lewin had been training on his own for months, but he knew his sword skills weren't great. He noticed a woman watching him from the shadows every morning and finally decided to confront her. This woman turned out to be Iris Curdy, the youngest and first female captain of the Royal Knights. She was a big deal in the kingdom, but in person she was actually pretty shy and a bit of a weirdo. Curdy admitted she had been watching Lewin because his technique was messy, and it was bothering her as a professional. Lewin realized she was the perfect person to learn from and asked if she would mentor him. At first, Curdy tried to act all tough and important, pretending she was too busy for him. But when Lewin immediately backed off and said he'd just find someone else, she panicked. She actually really wanted to teach him but was trying to play hard to get. She quickly changed her mind and agreed to help him, but on one condition. Lewin had to promise never to tell anyone she was stalking him. She was terrified that if word got out, her reputation as a captain would be ruined. Lewin laughed it off and agreed, telling her he never saw it as stalking anyway. They officially introduced themselves and hit it off. Curdy was 27 and very successful, while Lewin explained he made a living gathering herbs. They agreed to meet every morning in front of his inn for training. Lewin felt incredibly lucky to have such a high-ranking knight as his first teacher, and Curdy was secretly hyped to finally have her first apprentice. The next morning, Lewin woke up early, grabbed a quick bite, and headed out in his armor. He was fired up and ready to start his first real lesson. Curdy was already there, watching him from her usual hiding spot before officially stepping out to start their new journey together. Curdy agreed to train Lewin on one condition. He had to keep it a secret that she had been stalking him. Lewin, being a good kid, promised not to say a word, which was a huge relief for Curdy since she was the captain of the Royal Knights. With that awkwardness out of the way, they started their training the very next morning. Even though Lewin showed up early, Curdy was already there waiting. She was genuinely excited to teach him. To start, she asked Lewin to show her his usual sword swings. After watching him for a bit, she stopped him. She noticed his form was messy because he was trying to copy someone else's unique style that didn't fit him at all. She told him he needed to forget everything he knew and start from zero. Kurdy demonstrated a basic overhead slash. It was a simple move, but she did it so perfectly that Lewin was blown away. When he tried to copy her, he realized just how bad his own skills were. Kurdy reassured him that with practice he'd get better. Over the next few hours, she pushed him hard. She was strict about every little detail, from his posture to how he moved his feet. By the end of the session, Lewin was more exhausted than he'd ever been, but he felt great because he knew he was finally learning the right way. Over the next 2 weeks, they kept at it every single morning. Lewin's swings became smoother and more natural. He started to realize that Kurdy wasn't just some weirdo, she was an incredible warrior and a great teacher. Once his basics were solid, Kurdy decided it was time to move on to actual combat training. She explained that practicing swings is good, but fighting is how you really get strong. Kurdy revealed she was a master of multiple weapons, not just the sword. She offered to be Lewin's sparring partner, promising to go easy on him. Lewin was nervous but determined to land at least one hit. When the spar started, Lewin went all in with a powerful overhead slash. To his surprise, Kurdy blocked it effortlessly. It felt like he had hit a piece of cloth, all the power from his blow just vanished. With a tiny push, she sent him stumbling back. The gap in their strength was massive, and Lewin felt his confidence shaking. Kurdy cheered him on, telling him not to give up. Since she wasn't attacking yet, Lewin tried to come up with a plan. He knew he couldn't beat her with raw power, so he started thinking about using his items, like his magical grass, to create an opening and find a way to get past her perfect defense. Lewin realized that even if he spent a lifetime thinking, he couldn't figure out how to hit Kurdy, a skilled fighter who was currently training him. During their practice, Lewin tried to outmaneuver her by slipping behind her, but Kurdy barely moved a step to block him. She gave him some blunt advice. His movements were okay, but his swings were too weak. Lewin felt a bit discouraged because while he was trying his hardest to surprise her, she was relaxed enough to give him a lecture. He kept trying different patterns, feints, diagonal slashes, and thrusts, but nothing worked. His only confident move was a powerful overhead slash, so he decided to set up a trap to use it. He faked a thrust to bait her, moved into her blind spot, and finally unleashed his overhead strike with everything he had. The swords collided with a loud metallic ring, but Kurdy still managed to block it by dropping into a low stance. To Lewin's shock, his wooden sword snapped clean in half from the impact. Kurdy ended the session, explaining that she wanted him to realize through experience that relying on just one move wouldn't work in a real fight. Lewin took the lesson to heart, seeing her as a brilliant teacher. When he mentioned he would be gone for 4 days on a gathering quest, Kurdy looked surprisingly sad, almost in shock that she wouldn't see him. Lewin felt bad for forgetting to tell her, but promised to keep practicing his swings even while away. The next morning, Lewin woke up with his entire body aching from the intense session. He used some recovery potions and slime liquid to soothe his muscles before heading to the Adventurers Guild to meet Iron Gear, the E-rank party he regularly hired for protection. The group consisted of Bayan, Porta, Lyra, and Nina. Despite their rising fame for clearing high-level quests at record speed, they treated Lewin like a close friend and promised to always take his requests. As they hiked toward Mount Cornello, the atmosphere was casual and friendly. Lyra teased Lewin about a promise he supposedly made, though he couldn't remember it at all. Nina confirmed he had made a promise, leaving Lewin confused but curious about what they had planned for later at the camp. On the way to the gathering site, Lewin asked Bayan and Porta if they would be up for a friendly mock battle later. Bayan was excited, but Porta was hesitant, worried that losing to the person they were supposed to protect would be embarrassing. After some convincing and Bayan calling Lewin an honorary member of their team, Porta finally agreed. The group reached their base and finished a successful round of gathering. Lewin managed to find plenty of magical grass and 3 rare dumbbell weeds. Just as they were wrapping up, Lewin spotted a new plant species he had never seen before, sparking his curiosity for what else the mountain had in store. Lewin found a rare plant called curare leaf, which had a medium-level paralysis effect. He figured it would be perfect for making a stronger batch of poisonous slime liquid. Happy with his find, he headed back to base with his companions, Bayan and Porta. As they got closer, the delicious, spicy smell of curry filled the air. Lyra and Nina, the 2 female members of their group, Iron Gear, had prepared a feast. Lyra teased Lewin for forgetting their promise to have a curry tasting, but she was mostly just happy to see him enjoy the meal. Nina had made a light vegetable curry, while Lyra made a hearty meat version. Lewin, who usually ate a bitter medicinal version of the dish, was blown away by how good the real thing tasted. After a satisfying dinner, the mood was great, but Bayan suddenly shifted gears. He wanted to hold a mock battle tournament to see everyone's skills. Lewin was all for it because he had been training with a secret teacher, a powerful knight named Kurdy, and needed the practice. Lyra was hyped to join, and even Nina, who usually stayed in the back during fights, seemed ready to participate. They decided the matchups with rock, paper, scissors. Porta, who wasn't much of a fighter, ended up facing Lewin first, while Bayan was set to fight Nina. When the match between Lewin and Porta started, Porta looked nervous. He took a defensive stance, but Lewin had been practicing a specific overhead slash for a month. Lewin stepped in and swung with everything he had. The move was so fast and powerful that Porta couldn't block it in time. The wooden sword slammed into Porta's head with a loud crack, knocking him flat on his back. Luckily, Nina used a healing spell immediately, so Porta was okay, though he was definitely shaken by Lewin's speed. Next up was Bayan versus Nina. To Lewin's surprise, Nina was actually the best sword user in their group. The fight was intense and high level, with both of them trading fast blows and clever counters. In the end, Nina won by landing 3 solid hits, leaving Bayan frustrated but impressed. Since Lewin had won his first match and Nina won hers, they did another round of rock, paper, scissors to see who would face Lyra. Lewin lost, meaning he had to fight Lyra next. Lyra warned him she wasn't going to hold back. As they faced off, Lyra stood perfectly still, waiting for him to make a move. Lewin decided to stick with his signature overhead slash. He closed the gap, waited for the perfect moment, and let the strike fly with full power. Lyra reacted instantly, throwing her sword up to block. The impact was so heavy that the sound of wood hitting wood echoed through the mountains like a metal crash. Lewin managed to block Lyra's heavy strike, but the sheer power pushed him back. Lyra and her teammate Porta were both shocked by how much Lewin's strength had jumped. Lewin tried to stay focused, but the brief chat broke his rhythm. Once they resumed, Lyra showed why she was the pro. She threw a series of clever feints that left Lewin confused, eventually landing a solid hit on his arm. From there, Lyra didn't give him a second to breathe. Her experience was just too much for him to handle, and she quickly landed 3 more hits. Lewin felt frustrated. He had started strong with a perfect overhead swing, but he couldn't keep up with her fast pace and technical tricks. Even so, Lyra praised him for the match and offered to keep doing these mock battles every time they went on a gathering quest. Lewin gladly agreed, seeing it as the perfect way to track his progress. Over the next few days of the trip, the team held a mini-tournament. Lyra ended up winning the whole thing because her unpredictable, intuitive fighting style was a nightmare for the others to deal with. Even though Lewin and Porta were stuck at the bottom of the rankings, the experience fired them both up. Lewin realized he needed to learn more than just a basic overhead swing if he wanted to stand a chance next time. When the group returned to the city of Grezista, Lewin was met by Kurdi, his mentor from the Royal Knights. She had been waiting for him near his inn, clearly worried about his safety even though she tried to play it cool. They agreed to start his intense training again the very next morning. For the next 3 months, Lewin's life became a non-stop grind. In the mornings and evenings, Kurdi pushed him to master various sword techniques like diagonal slashes, thrusts, and uppercuts. In the afternoons, he went to the Elf's Tears shop to learn potion making from the shop's owner, a kind but sharp old lady. She taught him her secret methods for making potions that didn't taste bitter, and Lewin found the process relaxing compared to his brutal physical workouts. Kurdi's dedication was incredible. She worked her regular job all day and still spent her mornings and nights training Lewin. He felt deeply grateful and promised to one day become strong enough to actually challenge her. That hard work paid off during his next gathering trip when he finally managed to beat Lyra in a mock battle, proving he was no longer just a beginner. The next morning, Kurdi showed up for training looking completely different. She had traded her heavy knight armor for stylish civilian clothes and let her hair down. She told a stunned Lewin that it was her day off and they were going to do some special training. She led him deep into the Nava forest, a dangerous area known for tough monsters. While Kurdi looked like she was dressed for a casual walk, she told Lewin it was finally time for him to put his skills to the test against real monsters. Lewin realized that the picnic was actually his first real trial in the wild. Lewin had plenty of experience fighting small groups of goblins and wolves in open areas, but Nava Forest was a different beast. The place was thick with trees and had terrible visibility, making it a perfect spot for monsters to hide. He was nervous, but he was here with Kurdi, his mentor and a skilled fighter. Kurdi explained that since Lewin had mastered the basics of swordsmanship, it was time to move to the next level. Real combat where one mistake could be fatal. She wanted him to gain experience by hunting monsters in their own territory. As they walked deeper into the dark, howling forest, Lewin stayed on high alert with his sword ready. Kurdi, on the other hand, was totally relaxed, strolling as if she were in a park. Suddenly, she warned him that monsters were close. Lewin didn't hear anything at first, but seconds later, 4 kobolds, dog-like monsters, jumped from the shadows. Lewin didn't panic. He moved smoothly, taking down the first 3 with quick, precise slashes. When the last one tried to run, he chased it down and finished it off. He realized that his training was paying off. What used to be a tough fight was now something he could handle with ease. Kurdi was impressed but told him they weren't done. They reached a small cave, which she called an abandoned dungeon. She explained that dungeons usually have a magic core that spawns monsters and treasure, but even when the core dies and the treasure is gone, monsters still use the caves as nests. If they didn't clear them out now, the monsters would eventually grow in number and attack people on the nearby roads. They stepped into the pitch-black cave. Kurdi used a light spell to help them see, but warned Lewin that the light would attract everything inside. Almost immediately, the sound of hundreds of footsteps echoed from the depths. A massive wave of goblins, kobolds, and horned rabbits rushed toward them. To make things harder, Kurdi told Lewin she wouldn't help at all. She wanted him to protect her and handle the entire horde alone. Lewin felt a rush of fear, but he focused. The monsters weren't smart, they just charged blindly. He prioritized the fast kobolds first, taking them out with efficient swings, then moved on to the goblins and the charging rabbits. Every move had to be perfect. One miss meant getting swarmed. He fought for what felt like hours, his muscles screaming and his body shaking from exhaustion. Just as he reached his limit, a final group of goblins and kobolds charged. His arms felt like lead and his sword felt heavy, but as he swung at a kobold, something clicked. He felt the same strange, effortless power he had experienced once before in a life-or-death struggle. By relaxing his body and then exploding with strength at the exact moment of impact, his sword moved with incredible speed and force. He took down the remaining monsters in seconds. Their defense meant nothing against his new technique. Standing among the fallen monsters, Lewin realized he had finally broken through to a new level of strength. After finishing off the last few goblins, Lewin sat down, completely wiped out. Even though they were weak monsters, the non-stop fighting had drained him. Kurdi, his mentor, walked over and gave him some feedback. She pointed out that he made mistakes when he got tired, but she was happy to see him finally finding his rhythm with the sword. When it was time to head back to the city, Lewin tried to stand up but his legs gave out. Curdy offered him a piggyback ride. Lewin was embarrassed, but since he couldn't walk, he had to accept. As she carried him through the forest, Lewin was too flustered by her scent and warmth to focus on their conversation. However, he did get a front row seat to her fighting style when she easily took down monsters along the way while still carrying him. Once they reached the forest exit, Curdy let him down, not wanting the royal knights to see her. She teased him about enjoying the experience, but Lewin quickly clarified he meant watching her fight. He went home, treated his sore muscles, and crashed. 6 months passed quickly. Under Curdy's daily training, Lewin transformed. He was no longer the weak kid he used to be. During a plant-gathering trip with his friends in the party Iron Gear, they decided to hold a mock battle tournament. His friends, Lyra, Bayan, and Nina, had reached C rank, but they all admitted Lewin's growth was even more impressive. The first match was Lewin versus Lyra. Lyra was wild and unpredictable, but Lewin stayed calm. When she charged in with a surprise attack, Lewin used a heavy overhead strike that broke her balance. He didn't fall for her feints and kept a steady defensive stance, forcing her to waste energy. As she got desperate and moved too fast, she left an opening. Lewin landed a sharp thrust and a follow-up slash, winning the match perfectly. In the other bracket, something shocking happened. Porta, usually the weakest, managed to beat Bayan by playing a smart defensive game. Bayan was stunned, but Lewin was proud of Porta's hard work. The two friends bumped fists, promising to meet in the finals. To get to that final match, Lewin first had to get past Nina. She was a counterattacker and notoriously hard to hit because she never left openings. As the match started, both stood still, waiting for the other to blink. Realizing Nina wasn't going to move, Lewin finally stepped forward, closing the gap until their swords touched, preparing for a difficult fight. Lewin and Nina stood locked in a stalemate, swords pressed together as the referee, Lyra, yelled at them to get moving. Nina was a defensive specialist who loved to bait her opponents, making her incredibly dangerous to attack. Lewin tried to mess with her timing by switching from slow to fast strikes, but Nina was smart. She faked being off balance just to lure him in for a heavy counter. Lewin barely blocked it in time, realizing that fighting Nina was more about reading her mind than just swinging a sword. After a tense back and forth, Lewin spotted a real opening. He ignored his fear of it being another trap and lunged forward, landing a solid hit on Nina's arm. That strike secured his victory. Exhausted and nursing a headache from the mental strain, Lewin sat with Nina, who admitted she felt completely defeated because she couldn't land a finishing blow despite her tricks. They shook hands, both having enjoyed the high-level match. However, the day wasn't over. As the sun began to set, Lewin had to face his friend Porta in the finals. Porta was known as one of the weaker fighters, but he had a secret weapon. A magic buff called Auto Bravery that gave him explosive speed and power. As soon as the match started, Porta blurred across the field. Lewin's reflexes were sharper than ever after his fight with Nina, allowing him to block a strike that would have ended the game instantly. Porta suggested they stop playing it safe and just trade blows head-on. Lewin agreed, and the two began a brutal, straightforward clash. It wasn't about fancy techniques anymore, it was just wood hitting wood as they pushed their bodies to the limit. They were both smiling through the pain, enjoying the pure adrenaline of the fight. Suddenly, during a heavy exchange, Porta's sword flew out of his hand. He tried to scramble for it but collapsed, his body had hit its limit, and he had run out of magic. Lyra declared Lewin the winner of the tournament. Over the next 3 days of their mountain quest, Lewin kept his winning streak alive, eventually becoming the overall champion of the mock battles for the first time in a year. As the group finished their work and headed back to the city of Grezista, Lewin was excited to tell his mentor, Curdy, about his progress. But when they reached the city gates, the atmosphere was tense. A large group of royal knights on horseback was rushing out of the city, led by a woman in armor who looked exactly like Curdy. She locked eyes with Lewin for a split second before riding off. Sensing that something big and dangerous had happened, Lewin followed his friends to the Adventurers Guild to find out why the elite knights were on the move. The purple-skinned troll standing in the center of the square was clearly on another level. Unlike the mindless green ones they had fought on the way in, this one looked smart and composed. It wasn't just standing there, it was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay sharp," Bayan whispered, his grip tightening on his weapon. "This isn't a normal troll, it's likely an elite or a leader." Nina immediately launched a magical attack to stop the creature from healing, but the purple troll swatted the spell away like it was a fly. It let out a low growl that shook the nearby windows and charged at them with speed they didn't think a monster that size could have. Lewin didn't wait. He used the same explosive speed he had shown against the ogres, diving low to get under the troll's massive club. But this time the enemy reacted. The troll shifted its weight and kicked out, forcing Lewin to roll away just to keep his head on his shoulders. "Lyra left, Bayan right," Lewin shouted, quickly finding his rhythm. The three of them began a high-speed dance of blades around the monster. While Lyra and Bayan distracted it with quick slashes to its legs, Lewin looked for a gap in its defense. The troll was tough, even with Porta's strength buff, their swords were barely cutting through its thick purple hide. Every time they landed a hit, the wound would try to knit back together instantly, fighting against Nina's magic. The troll swung its club in a massive circle, forcing everyone to jump back. Seeing an opening, Lewin leaped off a nearby stone fountain, spinning in the air to gain momentum. He brought his sword down with everything he had, aiming right for the back of the monster's neck. The troll tried to turn, but Lyra and Bayan lunged forward at the same time, stabbing into its knees to pin it down for a split second. That second was all Lewin needed. His blade sank deep into the troll's neck, cutting through the tough muscle and bone. With a final heavy thud, the purple troll collapsed, its body turning into a heap of meat on the cobblestones. The square went quiet for a moment as the group caught their breath. "Nice work, Lewin," Bayan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If you hadn't taken that leap, we'd be stuck grinding that thing down for an hour." But there was no time to celebrate. From the rooftops and the narrow alleys, more growls echoed. The Demon King's army wasn't done yet. They could see smoke rising from the deeper parts of the city where the main civilian shelters were located. "We have to keep moving," Nina said, pointing toward the inner district. "The knights are likely pushed back near the palace. If we don't get there soon, there won't be a city left to save." The team shared a quick nod. They were tired, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and monsters, but they couldn't stop. With Lewin leading the way, the 5 of them sprinted deeper into the chaos of Sekal, ready to face whatever the Demon King had waiting for them. The purple troll stood out from the rest, looking like a high-ranking officer in the Demon King's army. Unlike the other monsters, this one could actually talk, taunting the group with a vulgar smile. Lewin, Bayan, and Lyra were frozen in shock, realizing this thing was way more dangerous than anything they had faced before. They were about to retreat when a little girl accidentally ran right into the middle of the standoff. The troll moved to finish her off with its massive greatsword, but Lewin's body moved on instinct. He dashed forward and blocked the heavy blow just in time. The impact felt like an explosion, but Lewin managed to hold his ground, scoop up the girl, and hand her off to his teammates Porta and Nina in the back. With the girl safe, the real fight began. 2 ogres tried to join the fray, but Lewin took them out instantly with 2 perfect strikes to keep the odds even. However, even with Bayan and Lyra helping, the purple troll was just playing with them. It was fast, smart, and incredibly strong. No matter how hard they fought, the troll kept laughing, enjoying the battle while the team grew exhausted. Minutes felt like hours. Nina's healing spells were the only thing keeping them alive, but her anti-heal magic wasn't slowing the troll down at all. Its body healed almost instantly from every scratch. Realizing they couldn't win a fair fight, Lewin decided to use his secret weapon, potions. He threw a powerful poison potion, then a paralysis potion. The troll, being arrogant, smashed the bottles midair, letting the liquid soak into its skin. It acted like it didn't care, but Lewin noticed its skin melting and its movements becoming slightly stiff. To finish the job, Lewin downed a high-grade strength potion. It tasted disgusting, but it filled him with a massive rush of power. Now on equal footing, Lewin went on the offensive. He landed a heavy blow that actually made the troll stagger. Lyra and Bayan jumped in, wounding the monster's stomach, but it healed too fast. The troll then shifted its focus, ignoring Lewin to land a brutal hit on Bayan. Bayan went down, coughing blood, but yelled for Lewin to keep fighting. Seeing his friend hurt, Lewin pushed past his fear and traded blow after blow with the monster. The strength potion made Lewin faster and stronger by the second. Even though the troll was a monster, it seemed to be having the time of its life. The battle turned into a blur of clashing steel. Despite the troll's insane healing, the poison and paralysis were finally starting to add up. Lewin's sword began finding its mark more often, carving deeper wounds into the monster as its movements finally started to lag. The final moment of the fight was inches away. Lewin's sword skills improved with every clash as he fought the purple troll. Finally, the monster slowed down just enough for Lewin to take its arm off, sending its weapon flying. Lewin didn't waste a second and finished the monster off with a final strike. Even as it was dying, the troll laughed, saying it had fun before Lewin ended it for good. Lewin didn't have time to celebrate because he was worried about his friend Bayan. He turned around and saw Bayan lying in a pool of blood with their teammates Nina, Lyra, and Porta, rushing to help. Nina used her healing magic, and luckily Bayan opened his eyes. He was badly hurt but stable. Once Lewin saw his friend was okay, the adrenaline from his strength potion wore off and he collapsed from exhaustion. While Nina treated Lewin's fatigue, the little girl he saved, Monica, came over to thank him with a big smile. Soon after, a knight named Kurdy, who is actually the captain of the royal guard, arrived on horseback with Monica's mother. After a sweet reunion, Kurdy pulled Lewin aside. She told him the purple troll he killed was likely just a disposable soldier for the Demon King's army. Lewin was shocked that something so strong was considered a nobody in the enemy's ranks. Later, Lewin's team met up with a veteran adventurer named Edward. Since Lewin was too tired to walk, Edward carried him back to the city on his back. Edward is a legendary figure but very humble and kind. On the way, Edward explained that the monster Lewin fought was a venom troll, a creature artificially made by the Demon King's army. This was bad news because it meant the enemy could potentially mass-produce these powerful monsters. Back at his inn, Lewin fell into a deep sleep. In the middle of the night, he woke up to a noise and saw a shadow in his room. He almost panicked but realized it was Kurdy. She had let herself in because she was worried about him and he hadn't answered her knocks. She was acting shy and embarrassed, which was a big change from her usual tough knight persona. Kurdy brought him a high-quality recovery potion as a gift. Lewin took a sip and immediately realized it wasn't just a normal potion, it was a top-grade one from the famous shop Elf's Tears. He was surprised she would spend so much on him, and Kurdy seemed impressed that he could tell how expensive it was just by the taste. After the intense battle at Sekal, Lewin wakes up to find Kurdy, a master swordswoman who has been mentoring him, by his bedside. She brings him a high-grade recovery potion, which is a rare and expensive gift. Kurdy explains that the city has been reclaimed and the monsters cleared out, but Lewin can't help feeling guilty. Seeing the destruction firsthand made him realize he wasn't strong enough to save everyone. He decides he needs a new goal. He doesn't just want to keep up with his friend Ahmed anymore, he wants the power to protect people. Over the next 3 days, Lewin rests and thinks about his life in Grezista. He spent a year training with Kurdy and learning about potions from an old lady at a shop called Elf's Tears. While he's grown a lot, he feels like he's hitting a wall. His progress is slowing down, and the fight with the Venom Troll proved that he only won because of his team and his special plant master skill, not his own strength. He realizes that if he stays here doing the same routine, it'll take a decade to reach the level he wants. Lewin decides the only way to truly grow is to leave the city and travel the world. He wants to find rare plants to boost his abilities and explore dangerous dungeons. Most importantly, he wants to find Ahmed, who hasn't visited him in a year. Once he's fully recovered, Lewin meets Kurti outside his inn. After a short practice session, he drops the news that he's leaving Grezista. Kurti is shocked and tries to convince him to stay, arguing that he's already strong for his age. However, Lewin is honest with her. He admits that he lacks the natural talent for swordsmanship that she has. He points out that his growth has flattened, and at this rate, he'll never be able to defeat her. Kurti goes quiet because she knows he's right. Lewin clarifies that he isn't giving up. He's leaving so he can find a different way to get stronger and eventually surpass her. Seeing his determination, Kurti finally smiles and gives him her blessing. She promises to wait for him to return and challenge her again. They shake hands, and Lewin vows to himself that he will do whatever it takes to become strong enough to keep his promise.